I talked about cognitive functions previously, and cognitive function is, or human mental capacity and mental capabilities. However, what kind of cognitive functions are necessary for children's school education, especially those 5 or 6 years older, so those school beginners? Most important part is for 5 years, especially those developmental milestone age, and cognitive part is important, and then cognitive and language, and those are just as I said, reciprocally interdependent, intertwining. They have to helping each other while developmental period. If there is those connections are a little bit loosened, and there will be some cognitive weaknesses. So especially most important part is the beginning very early stage of cognitive functions, cognitive process. We call it a sensory processing disorder these days. We call before we say sensory integration disorder, but now we say sensory processing disorder. So most of school personnel believe sensory processing part is occupational therapist work. So special education teachers believe it's not their territory, and general education teachers, obviously, it is a disability, is not my thing. So that kind of attitude they could have, or it's not even attitude, it's their true beliefs, because they are not properly trained, prepared for those, atypical developmental part. So those sensory processing is not only small fine motor skill related, not just only sensitivity, oversensitivity, because oversensitivity, it really just we feel like it really tortures children when they have oversensitivity. So we just have to protect them. So we have a sensory friendly classrooms, learning environment, the home environment. We just talked about those a lot. So that is more like a protective approach. So regardless of how we approach, and then base and just our belief why we work on this, pretty much sensory processing involves 3 sensory categories. It's a Miller's 3 sensory categories. Is the first one is sensitivity modulation. So it's under sensitivity, oversensitivity, and then craving sensitivity. So we have 3 different kinds of sensitivities. So it's a Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R, and then some of them with her colleagues, and there are many articles out there. So if you're interested, please just read Miller's article, and that occupational therapy organizations, they have a very well organized website. So sensitivity regulations, sensitivity modulation, and or we say just sensitivity disabilities. Those sensitivity is under sensitivity, over sensitivity, or craving sensitivity, not or, and the craving sensitivity. So if children cannot modulate their function cognitively, they could not modulate those sensitivities, and then they may show undersensitivity. That undersensitivity is children with autism shows a great example. They do not respond to any sensory inputs, anybody's inputs, right? Sounds and just talking and then however they charge off for something like obsessive items, or they scream and yell with certain sounds, that's oversensitivity. Most of about 90% of children with autism shows undersensitivity. Most of their self-engagement is from undersensitivity. Undersensitivity means when you have a sensory input, it does not register. So there is no processing. So it's attention. So when sensory inputs are coming in, and then sensory inputs and then attention should be activated at the moment. So it's like that time attention is like consciousness. So you are aware of sounds, you are aware of visual inputs, you're aware of somebody's hugging your touch, that's a sensitivity. So most of the children do not respond to that. That's under sensitivity. And obviously, when child has under sensitivity and weak attention, and then learning is really not that great, because pretty much it's just all learning is through copying, mimicking, imitation in young baby time. As soon as the baby is born, they start watching, right? Even though their eyes are not clear, their eyesight is not clear yet, and then they could hear sounds, they could feel somebody's hugging them, holding them, right? It's all learning. So when they see that somebody just smile, and then they smile back, and then that's what, already just a research, I forgot the author's name, and there are great research, series of research with, they went to the hospital, the newborn babies, new birth, and then they saw just like a 45 hours old, and 30 minutes old, they just showed, and then they found those responses. We call it as a mirror neurons. So children, it's like a mirror. You just see mirror, and then you see yourself, and then you just make your facial expressions. So that much sensitivity is related to their human learning. So children are with the sensitivity, so that means they are not aware of those sensory inputs, and then there is no copying, no mimicking, no imitation. So I should not say no, but very limited, right? So that means it's no processing, because imitation, copying, and all those mimicking is you see, and then you process, and then you act like a dad, they act like a mom, right? When daddy always just like a yell when he's hungry, and then child just yell when they are hungry. So that's your imitation, and later on it's like identification. But imitation is more like a physical actions you imitate. However, identification is more like a characteristics. That's invisible things. So you act like, you feel like somebody just feel like daddy, and some. So that's all sensitivity related. So oversensitivity is not related directly like a sensory inputs, but it's just, both of them is all selective attention, right? So under sensitivity, so when as soon as the sensory inputs are coming in, and then attention there, and then they both work, and then try to recognize new inputs, and then they receive and they process. However, oversensitivity is when it's like let's say it's like a sensory gates is wide open, without filter, without guard. So whatever sensory information, because we have so many sensory inputs in a second, comes in, and then it just like overwhelm the child. That means the child cannot discriminate which sensory is what. So that's, visual oversensitivity. Usually just children overact with those lights or sounds, and they are just show those, emotional outbursts, emotional distress. However, visual oversensitivity means you cannot discriminate who's who. And then let's say just you went to the mall, you went to just like a market, and many people are there, and then they cannot identify their parents, their friends, because it's just too many people, and then they freeze. It's really oversensitivity. It's like a fright feelings, and then usually children just fight because they are so scared, and then some children fight against those whatever inputs, and some children just freeze there, and some children just fly, they run away. So we have three just reactions to these, sensitivities. So these are, all part of cognitive functions, and this sensitivity, sensory discrimination are directly related to children's learning because it's a sensory input. It's like that's how we learn. It's not just like a copying, mimicking and imitation. It's our learning, reread. That's a visual, right? Visual discrimination. So we see the words, then we can recognize it's just a mom went to the grocery store. 그러면 we see those five. Mom went to cross the grocery store. It's 5 words, so we can discriminate those 5 words and then visually, and then we could read that is visual attention as well. So visual attention is another part. It's when we talk, that visual attention is like we see clear lines and features there, right? It's a very basic level. So visual perception and visual attention is very, basic level. It's like a sensory discrimination and visual attention, and then it goes to the visual perception. So visual perception is more like a higher level, and then we have advanced visual perception. That is all about the functions. So I cannot explain in this small portion of my lecture. I cannot explain all. However, this cognitive function is just important for the learning. Remember that. So sensory discrimination, and then perception, we perceive, right? Perception, and then sensory-based motor, and then that is like it's not really like a physical part, the physical motor function. It's more like a senses in our body parts, our body, and what kind of body parts we have, and then body functions, and then our body balance, okay, and then body movement. Those are all senses. So it's different from motor functions, regular motor functions that are orthopedic impairment or orthopedic physical disabilities, okay? And then we have, conception, and then we have, especially attention is very important. We have 5 attentions, right? So that 5 attention is just selective attention, sustained attention, focused attention, and then divided attention and alternating attention. So I'm going to have a chance to explain, this attention more. So later on, I will have more, to talk about each cognitive function. However, these are all we say cognitive function, and it is a critical cognitive power related to children's learning outcomes. Okay.